one paragraph just to engage with the next paragraph because I'm not good at finding stopping points. So I know Joe's better at it than me. So I'm going to go back one paragraph in the PDF if everybody wants to follow along. We'll get started here in a minute. If you can, please give out coins to the refugees. They need them. Even people from Gaza, they all need it. So if you can, send them coins. Now, forgive me. There's a lot of words. It's a very technical piece, I feel like. So there might be some words that I might have issues with. The flow of my reading might be a little off and stuff like that, but I'll do the best I can. We were talking about how the what were we talking about before? We were talking about how the Attica revolt, the rebellions happened, and how they needed the outside to also engage with another line. So, yeah. Well, thanks for following me. Okay, all right, let's get started, everybody. The state marked the surrender of the hostage on November 4th as the Auburn rebellion's end. Governor Rockefeller issued a press release claiming that prison guards and state police had swiftly restored order, recaging all captives. Captives are the people that are in jails and prisons without confrontation. Auburn's local paper, the Citizen Advisor, regurgitated this official lie, as did the New York Times, which declared the prison quiet after outbreak. In this brief discussion of Auburn, the New York State Special Commission on Attica makes no mention of official only allowing that the state's promise of no reprisal was broken. Then, when the 13 ringleaders were shipped out of Auburn and put in solitary confinement elsewhere, and Heather Ann Thompson, History of Attica, does slightly better, noting that captives were beaten and forced to run gauntlets of angry COs. These are correctional officers with their batons after their surrender. That over 100 rebels were placed in long-term isolation in Auburn, and that 6 were indicted for criminal acts committed during the rebellion. Yet despite being titled, quote, Voices of Auburn, Thompson's narrative is largely told from the perspective of a DOC's commissioner, Russell G. Oswald, and affords readers few opportunities to hear from the rebels themselves. For several months after their tactical surrender, the Auburn rebels waged a discursive insurgency that ruptured the narrative incarceration of their praxis. It started slowly, with few, if any, letters reaching their intended recipients for nearly 2 months. Between January and May 1971, however, their letters reached family members, federal judges, and community organizers. They were subsequently published in a variety of left outlets, including the Palatine and the Black Scholar, the Village Voice, and Right On. 6 months after reporting that Auburn was quiet, even the New York Times was forced to concede that the prison remained turbulent. Their offices were overwhelmed with what a journalist describes as, quote, hundreds of letters that poured forth weekly from the isolated galleries, some of which were penned in blood. In response to the captives' desperate calls for support, a Marxist group called Young Against War and Fascism launched the Prisoners' Solidarity Committee, PSC, an explicitly abolitionist formation established in February of 1971. The PSC functioned in one member's words as a, quote, a vehicle whereby the prisoners themselves could speak to the peoples outside, could generalize their struggle, fuse their grievances and their hopes into the main current of rebellion that is rising in the country as a whole. Comprised mostly of white university students and activists, the PSC provided, all right, have a good day, provided the rebels with invaluable financial morale, and legal support, creating the transportation program to convey family members from New York City to Auburn, and organized protests outside of the Cuyahoga County Courthouse, the site of the rebellion's legal aftermath. They even managed to infiltrate the prison by getting one of their members assigned as a legal assistant for the Auburn Six, who were indicted for the role in the November takeover. PSC's political labor left behind a rich yet largely untapped archive of abolitionist journalism, now memorialized in periodicals such as The Worker's World, The Activist, and the Battle Axe, in the pamphlet. Oh, sorry, Aziz. Oh, Aziz got up. Oh, so did Khadija. The PCS. Alaikum salam. I do have a little bit of Aziz. I don't have. Oh no, it did it to me, Joe. Oh my gosh, why is it doing that? Joe, are you there?
I'm working on it. I'm trying to get it to load. I can't get it to load.
I
keep
know.
hitting computer settings and it won't let it open.
You might have to close out of the app and then go back in. So I had to do that.
Everything else
Like
is
when I have to give out gifts, it's being weird.
Oh. All right, I'll be back.
Jesus Christ. The app is being weird, everybody. Oh, thank you. All right, Joe, got it. And I'm thinking that you're coming in. Are you there? There you are. Yay. All right, everybody. Sorry about that. The app is being glitchy today. Okay, November takeover. I'm going to reread this. The PSC's political labor left behind a rich yet largely untapped archive of abolitionist journalism, now memorialized in periodicals such as The Worker's World, The Activist, and Battle Axe, in pamphlets such as Fight for Freedom. It is the only thing worth fighting for, and Prisoners Call Out, Freedom, and across numerous flyers and other promotional materials. It is largely because the PSC valued and amplified the rebels' letter writing praxis, that an alternative discourse of the rebellion can be constituted. In contrast to that of the state, this narrative does not claim to tell the whole story. It does not pretend to be dispassionate or objective. It is explicit in its antagonism towards capital, white supremacy, and imperialist wars, from both foreign and domestic. After reigning control, Warden Fritz enacted a plan to isolate, silence, and punish the rebels, declaring a state of emergency. He placed the prison on a total lockdown indefinitely, suspending all programs, visits, internal movements, and correspondence. 11 of the 13 ringleaders were transferred to Attica and immediately sequestered in solitary confinement. The remaining two suffered the same fate in Green Haven. Out of the 400 black militants believing most active in the rebellion, Fritz isolated 80 captives within the gallery of, quote, special housing unit, SHU, cages on the top floor of the Auburn cell blocks, also known as, quote, the roof. The remaining malcontent were kept in 24-hour isolation in the general population, pending transfer to Comstock, Clinton, and other maximum security prisons. Once more, SHU space could be made available. Rebel letters authored during this period are saturated with meditations on the communicative failure, the limitations of the Espitolario. I don't know how to say that word. Espitolario. I'm going to look it up, everybody.
Epistolary.
Right, epistolary form of vestitues of of illegal prison censorship and the impossibility of conveying the scope of and intensity of the violence they endure. Quote, if I were to relate even some of the major deprivations suffered and still continued in this letter, then you would never receive it, wrote one captive. To put my situation on paper is impossible because things keep building up each and every day, leaving nothing in my imagination. Wrote another, besieged by inscrutable terror and dehumanization, their letters marked an existential rupture with dominant systems of knowledge production and representation, puncturing state-imposed silence without fully transcending them. We are the voices of black inmates who have been regulated into an obscure microcosm of ultra punitive segregation, the roof behind the iron curtain of Auburn prison. Nobody beyond these iron curtains, shade by a huge wall, can hear the constant cries echoing our our agony because the racist penal brutocracy, i.e., Rockefeller, Oswald, and Fritz, had insidiously concealed the atrocities inflicted on us daily. In a confidential DOC's report, an investigator included that his diligent search yielded no evidence that the rebellion was, quote, a brutal outcome of months or years of sadistic treatment, of color discrimination, of bad food, of senseless withdrawal of privileges, and of denial of proper civil rights. And yet, according to the rebel letters, even as this investigation was taking place, the population was enduring arcane forms of racial terror. They wrote about being stripped naked, beaten, and made to endure the freezing cold, a gassing, macing, and forced drugging, of being sprayed with water hoses, of being starved, or alternatively being served food that was intentionally contaminated with dead insects, feces, phlegm, poison, and shards of glass, sometimes from a wagon also used for hauling garbage, exposing the radical insufficiency of terms like, quote, solitary confinement and punitive segregation. They wrote a being forced into dark cells and strip cells, bearing concrete enclosures with no lights, plumbing, or furnishing, in which denuded men were suspended in space and time until they, quote, barely exist. As one victim of this practice explains, conceptualizing the prison as a space beyond legality, another wrote, so many crimes have been committed by the officials hereof that we no longer even know whether or not the United States Constitution is a law of the America or the martial decrees arbitrarily enforced by Harry Fitz and his agents. Within and against this ironclad atmosphere of racist hate, captives, rebels engaged in autopoetic experiments that narratively engendered radical mutations of their being. In prisoner cells called Freedom, Leon, also known as Writer for the People, and those articulations of protracted war opened this chapter, explaining that he was politicized in the tombs by Darobio bin Wahad and Kawado Consciencia of the Panther 21, following the development of arc of figures like Malcolm X, Eldridge Cleavers, and George Jackson. Leo traces his metamorphosis from what he called a, quote, GHETTO rodent, quote unquote, a subject that, quote, identified with all the establishment advocated as legitimate, that did not strive to be a man and to be human, and most of all, to be free. Into the revolutionary, Leon writes about studying the revolutionary tactics of Mao Zedong, Che Guevara, but explains that a deeper shift occurred at the level of consciousness and effect. From the Panthers, he learned that revolution has to be within the body of a person. Revolution is a process of rearranging one's values. To put it simply, the death of a inward and the birth of the black man. After coming to grips with being proud to be oneself, echoing Fanon's theorization of how anti-colonial struggles leads to the death of colonized being and the opening of a new humanist horizon, Leon writes, I learned to stretch out my hand and be part of all mankind. In the following chapters, I offer a more thorough engagement with how this form of human beings was lived, including the speculative interpretations of the meaning behind the masculine ascription. For now, let us dwell on the myriad ways that imprisoned black radicals developed letter writing and discursive technology and counter war. Their I can't say that word. As
Epistolary.
epistolary praxis ruptured their quote narratively condemned status, enabling them to constitute themselves as actors and chroniclers of a world historical event against the narrow framing of a conflict as an unprovoked outburst of extremist violence that disrupted an otherwise tranquil institution. They narrated the rebellion as a repudiation of genocidal atrocities. Moreover, hold on a second, I'm going to see who's in the thing. Who's in here? Dooley, I'll accept Dooley. Here we go. Moreover, at the underside of Western civilization, enlightenment, embrace, they narrated formations of black radical becoming that simultaneously critiqued and overran the boundaries of human project. As they always do, the foot soldiers and carceral war responded to these movements by ratcheting up repression, zealously policing the borders of the existing hierarchy. However, their violence had lost its determinative power, for the rebels resolved that it would not now flow both ways. Insurgent counter-humanism. Anybody have anything to say before I move on to the next section? Anything that might have hit you want to respond to?
No, I just wanted to come up at the end.
Okay. All right. Well, nothing from you, Joe? If not, I'll move on. Yeah, all right. Sounds good. Surgent counter-humanism. The corporeal terrain of struggle is the terrain of physical violence. Prisoncrats legitimated their violence by hiding it. Huh? What'd you say? Say it one more time.
Legitimated
Their violence by hiding it, mystifying it beneath the obfuscating language, and by labeling the rebels as an extremist initiator of violence. However, as Fanon explains, it is the colonialist who speaks in the language of violence, the colonialist who regulates the colonized to status of lower species, and thus it is the colonialist who has always shown them, the colonized, the path they follow to liberation. Black captives are seen as beyond the pale of humanity, as beasts who needed to be contained. As a high-level prison official explained in 1974, many of the guards felt that they were, quote, special kind of breed of animals that has very little hope for rehabilitation, end quote. Against this normalized dehumanization, the Auburn rebels enacted a insurgent counter-humanism. Into this atmosphere of totalizing violence, they introduced a counter-violence that communicated their willingness to universalize the disposability dispossibility of life.
Disposability.
Disposability of life, thank you. If no other options were available, barred from assessing the trappings of humanity, the colonized sought to reduce the colonizer to a state of equality, revealing in Fanon's word that, quote, his life is breathing and his heartbeats are the same as yours, coupled with its, oh my gosh, epistolario, I can't say narration, the reciprocation, right? Reciprocation of violence reflected the rebels' militant refusal of the epistemic and ontological arrangements of the work. I'm assuming that I did okay because no one did anything. So prisons.
I told you I won't talk unless you ask me. I don't want to interrupt.
Oh, epistemic. Okay, thank you. Prisons had long served as cauldrons of martial black radicalism. Behind the walls, there was no shortage of people who engaged in the disciplined study and practice of unarmed combat, weaponized their bodies by doing thousands of push-ups per day, executing weighted punches, and hardening the bottoms of their feet by running barefoot in the prison yard. During the late 1960s, black radicals regularly organized secret fighting competitions in an abandoned area of Green Haven, attended by various black nationalist formations. These underground contests provided opportunities for captives to hone their martial prowess in an environment oriented towards collective survival and liberation. They employed Eastern Asian style such as karate and judo, as well as their own fighting systems, with names like mental boxing and kill the enemy within. Captors developed these techniques to preserve bodily autonomy while fighting in the internal terrain of war. The conquest of fear, doubt, and the inferiority complex imposed by the colonizing process. Whenever possible, we will avoid antagonizing the pigs, notes the rules and regulation of Auburn's BPP, and yet members were instructed to arm themselves with knives, karate, and brute strength, so that if the pig should make it apparent that he intended to take you off this planet, you may get the opportunity to take at least one pig with you. Isolated on the roof, the Auburn 80 responded to a carceral siege with ever more rebellion. On December 20th, 1970, for example, they launched an attack from within the most secure section of the prison. A memo from Warden Fritz limbs this insurgency through the drab vernacular of state bureaucracy. And I think this might be him saying this. I'm not sure. Let's find out. Whereas a number of inmates in one of the special housing units participated in a second uprising on December 20th, 1970, in that when staff released them from their cells in order to provide outdoor exercises, these inmates armed themselves with a variety of weapons made from cell furniture, destroyed for this purpose. Mop handles and brooms broke the windows in the special housing unit, removing the control levers used to open and close the windows. They armed themselves with such levers as weapons and then refused to return to their cells upon order of institution officials, making it necessary to use tear gas, mace, and other physical force to compel inmates to return to their cells and to submit to a search for weapons, all of which created a grave threat to the safety and security of the facility. Fritz framed the SHU rebellion as a unprovoked guerrilla ambush against the unwitting guards who were only performing their duties to ensure their captives received their legal mandate hour of recreational time outside their cages. Unresponsive to rational speech, this bloodthirsty horde left the guards with no choice but to beat them back with defensive force and utmost restraint. 6 months after the confrontation, the Black Scholar published a letter that indict oh my gosh
I think it's in indicts.
indicts Auburn's imprisonocrats from co-signing the rebels, to a realm beyond humanism, protective embrace. According to Jalal Abul Alim, he and other members of the Auburn 80 were caged 24 hours per day in cruel and inhuman conditions. He wrote that in response to trivial things like demanding our human rights, hot meals, clean clothes, constitutional guarantees, showers, etc., they were subjected to physical, psychological, and sexual attacks that assailed the surfaces and the interior of their bodies, the flesh, the vital organs, the nervous system, the respiratory system, and the senses. My first beating came after 36 of us were gassed in mace, and I refused to submit to a rectal examination. I was deaf in my left ear for more than 2 weeks and received lacerations on my legs, arms, and head. By placing rectal examinations in scare quotes, LM demystifies this commonly used technique of sexualized conquest that is normally cloaked in rationalistic jargon. The rebels were not passive recipients of these treacherous, but rather historical agents who analyzed what was being done to them and consciously fought back. Although they numerically outnumbered their tormentors, they were technologically outgunned and physically immobilized in carceral space, responding to an increasingly militaristic siege tactics. They employed a form of incarceral guerrilla warfare. As George Jackson explains, guerrilla warfare is, quote, not fought with high-tech weaponry or state-of-the-art gadgets. It is fought with whatever can be had, captured weapons when they can be had, but often acquainted, antiquated firearms, homemade ordnances, knives, bows, and arrows, even slingshots, but mostly through the sheer will of the guerrilla to fight and win no matter what. The Auburn rebels actualized this insight, fighting to maintain the modicum of autonomy with no conceivable path to victory. Quote, during the onslaught of these pigs, we were being gassed and forced to break up our toilet bowls, sinks, and beds in order that we might defend ourselves to a degree from those spacemen-looking pigs, with their clubs, mace, and array of gas masks, oxygen cans, and tear gas guns, with which we were vamped on. The racist pigs left 20 and 30 gas canisters behind that we were left to deal with. For their ongoing rebellion, they paid the high price, not only in blood and born, but also in financial debt for the damage occurred in the prison. I have to pay $87.47 before I'll be able to buy in bare necessity toothpaste, soap, etc. Elm wrote, I hate to even mention how much prison time and wages it would take for me to pay that price. Oh, someone got blocked. Interesting. I didn't see. So, who's in here? Oh, no, go away. We was wild. They used the C word, by the way. Brother explained to me over the phone. We used to like cursing at them, calling them pigs, spitting on them, and throwing our piss and shit on them. And I had asked him why he and others on the roof had organized such strong resistance, rather than responding through the rubric of political politics, radical revolutionary, or otherwise. He attributed this protracted rebellion to a psychoaffective disorder. He explained that the rebels were not, quote, in the right mind. We are operating as rational, self-owned subjects, but rather as the bearers of, I don't know how to say it, it's the mad, whatever, on ungovernable cognitive schemas. And some of us were extremists, he continued. His adoption of the term that is often hurled by the state as a delegitimizing gesture resonated with this proclamation by Jackson. I am an extremist. I call for extreme measures to solve extreme problems. It is telling, however, that, for example, Brother A used to illustrate rebel extremism and wildness, they used the C word, the hurling of offensive language, bodily fluids, and feces, again reflect the profound asymmetry of this struggle. A prison psychiatrist who testified at a federal hearing noted that the rebels were struggling through severe trauma, resulting in a sharp increase of suicidal ideations and an incident of self-harm. And yet, prison-crats were in the position to weaponize mental health. Numerous letters accused the state of having captives forcibly committed to the Dannemora State Hospital for the criminally, I can't say that word, forgive me, I'm going to say it, for criminally insane.
I'm not gonna say it. Just don't say these words. You can just skip the whole paragraph.
Well, we need to come up with a different thing. We're not going to skip the whole paragraph. We can come up with a different word that means something different than that.
We
Mentally
could just say
unstable?
asylums.
In what?
Asylums?
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I've been asking. What is the different word for it? Thank you. And of deploying drugs and reducing them to a vegetated state. What does it mean to be wild? To be extreme, to be wild amid a condition of it that it is itself beyond reason. A letter from James Cotto Dunn, dated January 5th, 1971, echoes Fanon, positing that it was the carceral environment that was wild and extreme, inscribed in beautifully ornate penmanship. Jesus, a letter accuses prison-crats of subjecting captives to, quote, uncivilized act of wild punitive maltreatments, hoping to curtail the, quote, abuses of denial of certain guaranteed rights under the U.S. Constitutions. Cotto's letter pleads for legal support. However, as time wore on, these abuses intensified. He grew more belligerent, developing a reputation of grabbing patrolling guards through the bars of his cage and choking them out whenever he caught one getting too close. These attacks would invariably result in Cato being singled out for special brutalities, humiliations, and violations. Yet the guards understood that they could not abuse him without incurring a consequence, and so they began to give the area in front of his cage a wide berth. In a letter published months later in Right On, Cato seems to have abandoned any aspirations for conclusions into normative humanity or citizenship. Gone are the references to the U.S. Constitution, human rights, or attorneys, and their steed. Cato demands, quote, equal weapons, not equal rights, outside of the social contract of the I always mess this word up. Polity? Yeah, I said it. Okay, polity. The only way to ensure survival and secure the preconditions for being human was the captivity to inflict what Fanon called to inflict what Fanon called a reciprocal homogeneity of violence. Determined physical rebellion overflow into the Cayuga County courthouse, where rebels noted the irony in the fact that affixed to the building exterior was a plaque commemorating Harriet Tubman, the militant abolitionist who lived in Auburn for a time and is buried in its cemetery. The rebels narrated themselves as Tubman's progeny, employing a range of abolitionists and counter-humanist tactics, reflecting their desire to disengagement with incarceral regime. A surveillance report notes that the 6 captives charged with crimes stemming from the November 4th takeover had to be carried from their cells to vehicles and forced into the courtroom. During this arraignment, the Auburn Six, as they came to be known, refused to answer to their slave names and declined to enter pleas, demanding instead that the federal government launch a probe into ongoing incarceral violence. They pounded tables, shouted obscenities, kicked doors, and were completely and positively uncontrollable. Note, an agent from the New York State Police. At one point, a fight broke out in the courtroom itself after being assaulted by the uniformed officer. Auburn rebel Kareem C. Ali retaliated, executing a double snap neck to the officer's chest and using his, manacles to choke him until his face turned purple. Kareem relented only after another officer put a gun to his head, cocked the hammer, and promised to blow his head off. Convinced that they would not receive a fair trial, the Auburn Six accepted a plea bargain for reduced sentences. We realized that any amount of time in any prison is no bargain, wrote their legal defense team, but we felt that the decision ought to be based on the chances we had to have an acquittal, on the chances that we had of using the trial to expose the conditions which exist in Auburn, which continue to exist in every penitentiary in New York, as you will know. But rather than turn themselves in and willingly turn to their tormentors, 2 of the Auburn Six jumped bail, inhabiting a illegal freedom that extended the Auburn Rebellion more than 2 years beyond its official declared end. On May 8, 1971, the isolated rebels launched another collective rebellion from Auburn's SHU. This one occurred simultaneously with a protest in which over 100 PSC members marched in the rain outside the prison. As chants denouncing prison slavery, class warfare, and homegrown fascism seeped through the concrete exterior, Brother A and others used the metal springs from their bed frames to pick the locks of their cages, then armed themselves with razor-sharp shards of porcelain obtained from shattering the sink affixed to the cell walls. They then emerged from their cages and ambushed the guards, smashing them with their self-fashioned blades, and attacks yielded a predictable result. Quote, "They beat us damn near to death and threw us back in our cells." Brother A recalls in a manner chilling in its matter of factness, and yet the guards were beaten and bloody too. In the absence of victory, the production of mutual suffering would have to do. The Auburn Rebellion exposed the inadequacy of existing carceral infrastructures to contain black insurgents. A confidential DOCS report noted that, quote, "The single yard is an open invitation for a few militants to overtake." Warden Fitz, meanwhile, complained to the commissioner that, quote, "The physical plant is not so designed to provide the necessary supervision of inmates who are bent and determined upon rebellion. Brother A recalls that one of the immediate legacies of the Auburn Rebellion was that DOCS shored up these structural vulnerabilities, henceforth soldering stainless steel sinks, toilets, and bed frames directly into the surface of its enclosure. After Attica, as I will discuss in a second part of this book, so-called control units, Maxi, and Supermax prisons exploded. Because of the struggle like Auburn's incarceral institution of the future were increasingly designed for war. As a protracted collision between opposing forces, Auburn's radically disrupted the normative paradigm of humanism. The rebels responded to a living lie of human universalities by exposing the physical and symbolic violence that regulated them to its underside. Through implacable resistance, non-cooperation, and epistolary insurgents, their counter-humanist praxis appropriated and redistributed a fraction of the violence that circled them, seeped into their pores, and assailed their psyches. In doing so, they communicated their refusal to be dominated and their desire to be liberated from humanity as embodied by their captors. Engaging Fanon's dialectics of violence and liberation, George Jackson had written, quote, "Two men died with the stroke that slays the slave master. A slave master dies in a way that he can do no man any further harm, and then the slave mentality of the former victim dies. But what then? In the final section, I examined some of the positive experiments with new modes of black radical being that the Auburn rebels created. The sounds of the different drummers." Anybody have anything to add? Anything that came up for them before I move on to this section?
No, not for me.
Okay, I'm going to take the silence as we're just going to move on. All right, cool. The sounds of a different drum. "I have nothing to say, sir," quote unquote. This enunciation of silence, huh?
Good job.
Yay, is attributed to Eric Thompson. Oh my gosh, 26,385. I have no idea. However,
it's also their prison number. So
okay, it's the prison
number by going 26385.
26385. Okay, prison number. Eric Thompson, 26385. 26385. However, at the top of the transcript of this exchange, in a small act of defiance, his chosen name is written in cursive lettering Jomo Sako Omuluwale. Jomo, I hope that's Jomo, offered his courteous but decisive answer in response to Vincent, Mancusa question, where you served with the charges today. Mancusi, I think, was the warden of Attica, where Jomo and other Auburn ringleaders, quote unquote, were transferred immediately after relinquishing their hostages. They were placed in solitary confinement, where they endured many of the same atrocities visited upon those still in Auburn. It was January of 1971. The illegal action initiated by the rebels had forced prison crats to adhere to their own protocols and grant the isolated rebels a disciplinary hearing in accomplice with, Sorestry versus Rockefeller. Quote, "Do you admit or deny these charges?" Mancusa asked, as if no one response was possible. Jomo remained silent. "Do you refuse to sign this paper?" Mancusi continued, and Jomo again gave no reply. Recognizing that his inquiry was leading nowhere, Mancusi ordered Jomo out of the room and called on 2 armed guards to testify. They claimed that on January 2nd, Jomo and others had approached their post forcibly, commandeered the public address system and announced that a strike was occurring in observance of Black Solidarity Day. This action, they claimed, participated in prison-wide disturbance. Participate. I can't say.
Precipitated. Good job.
The prison-wide disturbance that followed. Jomo was called back into the room and retold the narrative just outlined. Quote, "Do you admit or deny the charges?" Mancusi asked again. "I plead the fifth on the entire thing," said Jomo. Mancusi affirmed that the charges pushing Jomo by wielding his power to manipulate time. He eliminated 270 days from Jomo's good behavior, credits and sentences him to 60 days in solitary confinement, time that he, in fact, had already served. Mancusi then concluded the proceeding with finality. That is all? To close this chapter, I explore the modes of Black radical consciousness and that overturned the boundaries of liberal humanism, the rational self-ownership, against the grain of the state's narrative dominance. Such an experiment necessitates analyzing Black rebellion through different architectures of reality. To excavate this alternative universities of aspiration, desire, and dreaming beyond inclusion, I deploy conceptual tools that are unavailable within normative paradigms of Western knowledge. Towards this end, my methodological approach is this epistemological and effective terrain of struggling dissenters, visual and textual, evidence, and instead privileges listening to the sounds, silence, and rhythms of rebellion beyond the body. For it is here that we can perceive that theorists Stephen Best and Saidiya Hartman have called Black noise, quote, the kind of political aspirations that are inaudible and illegible within the prevailing formulas of political rationality, and as such are always ready, barred from the court. What happens when we actively listen to those expressions of being that exceed the structures of scientific positivism and rational thought? How might this speculative and provisional approach help us fathom the significance of rebellious silence? Into the void we could impose the rational motivation of avoiding self-incrimination, a motivation that almost certainly played a role in Jomo's refusal to engage. But could not there also be layers to his refusal to speak? What if his silence reflected a rejection of the question itself, a rejection of the terms through which the official narrative was being constructed? Do you admit or deny these charges? To answer using either word would have legitimized this process and the social order that is produced. Jomo Saku Whale, the handwritten name on the top of the page, is a noise that points to an otherwise concealed genealogy of Black radical struggle. Thompson 26385 adopted, quote, Jomo, and Kaikuya, named meaning burning spear, and Saku, a Fulu name meaning wise, from anti-colonial nationalist come statesmen of Kenya and Guinea, respectively. Omowale, meaning the child has returned home, is the Yoruba origins of, and was bestowed upon Malcolm X during his visit to Nigeria. 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 Yeah. Yeah.
Nigeria.
This,
You've got it.
this self-determining onomastic onomastic practice, as Edward, oh my gosh, Anasi has termed the renamed custom of Black Americans, disturbs the official temporality. I can't say temporality. I can't say it. Can you say it for me, please?
Temporality.
Temporality and geography of Black Solidarity Day, publicizing it in ways that politicizing it in ways of invoking indigenous African traditions, Pan-Africanism, revolutionary nationalism, third world decolonization, and what Adam Getachew calls anti-colonial world making. From this vista, Jomo's contemplative silence is perceptibly charged with a range of radical possibilities that the incarceral archives can neither fully register nor contain. Unfortunately for me, I did not have the opportunity to meet Jomo and discuss his philosophy before he passed away in 2017. However, I have engaged with his intellectual bequest by listening to and learning from the people whom he was closest. My conversation with Jomo's daughter, Eminia Davis, a theorist and scholar activist in her own right, have been transformative. During one of our discussions, I asked, what was the name?
Amani,
to discuss the significance of being the keeper of her father's knowledge. Her answer foregrounded intimacy, institutions, care, and love as ways of inhabiting a liberated humanity. Because in real life there was no real justice or healing from them, the Auburn and Attica brothers, I feel like they didn't get a fully distill or process what happened. Their whole lives became very reactive. By the time they were able to create any theory from what happened, many of them were too unwell, either mentally or physically. But the people that were close to them had a lot to access to their thought. I didn't really understand until my dad was transitioning, and I was trying to gather all the hundreds of letters he had sent me since like 1986. I would be up all night with him and would be reading through his letters, and it was as if he was trying to create a blueprint for everything, things that, and the moment. I didn't really understand why he was saying it. He wrote me a book on a legal pad, and it's like everything I should know since the beginning of time. Ancient Kemet, the Vikings. There are other things, like which flowers do what. Something like 40 pages. I think he realized that he was never going to get to a place of being the old storyteller man that I think he wanted to become. And that prison had afforded him the solitude to really think about what he wanted to continue and what he wanted people to know. Most of our conversations were not political. Most of our conversations were about healing, wellness, care, patience, compassion. Our relationship was constant distilling of what he learned in here, rubs chest. What? How you say it? Amani foregrounds how state-inflicted trauma conditioned her father's thought, largely preventing him and others from developing what they had learned from the generalizable social and political theory. At the same time, through physical proximity, emotional intimacy, and by reading and rereading her father's letter in the context of his transition across the threshold of life and death, she managed to access a distill and distill his thought. Reading those letters in this context, she became conscious in ways she had not before that her father had been trying to convey his deepest desires, to articulate a vision for what he wanted her and the world in which she lived to be. This positive vision was not reducible to resistance. I'm assuming I said it right. Sweet. All right. The political or rebellion. Rather, it prioritized healthy spirituality, internal character development, and authentic self-actualization beyond our present humanity. Her description of this knowledge as a possible, quote, blueprint for everything resonated with Cedric Robinson's assertion that the Black radical tradition is, quote, a continuing development of a collective consciousness informed by historical stages for liberation and motivate by the shared sense of obligation to preserve the collective being, a condition he termed the ontological totality. Years after surviving Auburn's in Attica, Jomo broke his silence, locating the rebellion's genesis in the struggle to revolutionize the minds of the prisoners, to help them, quote, understand that we as prisoners must join together for our common objectives and end to capitalism, imperialism, racism, and providing adequate food, housing, and shelter for our people, all people really, in sharp contrast to the state's framing of Auburn as a site of normative peace that was disrupted by the violent outbursts. Jomo frames the prison as a institutionalization of violence, indeed, as a flesh-eating monster. Quote, when the administration of the Auburn flesh pit refused to let us commemorate Black Solidarity Day in November of 1970, he wrote, we joined forces, took over the prison and the controls of our own lives. His inconvictions, right? Invocations, sorry, of this term, flesh, is evocative, yes, of Hortense Spiller's, oh my gosh, conical theorization of Black enfleshment as the violent, quote, serving the captive body from its motive will, its active desire, in an attempt to transform the captive into a, quote, being for the captor. For Jomo, the Auburn Rebellion emerged as a part of historical process in which subjects with no sovereignty over their bodies or lives began to transform their consciousness, their understanding of what it meant to be in the world. Larry Lumquamon White remembered his time in Auburn during the late 1960s and early 1970s as a turning point in his intellectual and political development. Lumquamon was politicized in Auburn by Jomo and others who organized the Black Solidarity Day strike. In and out of youth, I don't know how to say that. Reforminators? I can't say that word. We'll be right back. Oh, you highlighted the wrong one. Right back, everybody.
Reformatories. I'm so sorry. Youth reformatories. I got lost for a second. My grandson spoke to me.
You're right, reformatory, sorry. Which much of his childhood, Lumquamon looked to these comrades for political mentorship. During one of our many conversations, I asked him to tell me about the rebellion, and he responded not with stories of hostage taking property destruction or torture, but with a disclosure of self-realization. Auburn is where I realize self-realization. Auburn is where I realize.
Discourse. You said a something else.
I thought I said discourse. Auburn is where I realized I could think. I began to understand that I could write. I never tried to, but I remember I sat down and I started writing things down. I was shocked. Like, where did this shit come from? So I began to write and read stuff about Young Lords and the Black Panthers. And I began to integrate their stuff into my thinking. I began to hang out with them. And then it's just began to evolve. I would gather us all in the back room of the library and hold secret meetings and break down the political stuff the Panthers was teaching, especially as it applied to prison. For Laquemon Jamo and others, the Auburn Rebellion was fundamental, a cognitive rebellion, one that was really in process within and between bodies and minds prior to the moment in which hostages were captured. Indeed, the captive's first overtly rebellious act was the seizure of public address system, an instrument that facilitated communication through the amplification of sound and voice, supports what was interpretation, as does the shape of the rebellion's early stage, a refusal to work, and a series of self-organized gathering. My question about what happened on the roof during the state of emergency elicited a more, oh my gosh, tancurrent, I can't say that word.
Taciturn
response. After the rebellion, when they put us up in the box, they treated us horribly. This simple string of words conceals the depths of their meaning, the depths conveyed not through the words themselves, but in how they were uttered. Laquemon extended the word horribly into a moan that finally trailed into silence. Seated on the couch across from me, he shook his head slowly, and his eyes dropped to the ground. We sat there together with a heavy silence filling the room for what felt like an eternity. Just as I was about to change the subject largely out of my mouth discomfort, he broke the silence, flashing a broad smile. He changed the subject from torture, the negation of being, to theater in its invention. Quote, we had a dude up there who used to put on little plays. He would invent stories with different characters and do all their voices and sound effects. He told about how brothers were always yelling across the bars, how they were banging on whatever made the most noise, doing any and everything to disrupt the tranquility of the surrounding town. However, everyone would get quiet and listen when the thespian performed. It used to sound so real, he explained. Laquemon's refusal to re-narrate terror and to instead transmit that which he brought him and others joy, inmates an effective condition that the racial colonial violence of the state could neither penetrate nor extinguish. For those ensnared within this war zone was also a site of intimacy, care, and poise?
Poises?
Poises?
Poises. Poses. Because POESIS. Maybe it's two words put together. Poses.
basically bringing something into existence, of narratives and subjective innovation, while defending their living, breathing bodies. This formerly dehumanized population authored new practices of knowledge and sociality into existence. These practices constitute and reflect the spirit of rebellion about which so many of the rebels wrote. It is through these fleeting and improvisational laborers of black speculative production that demands for departure from normative humanity are made and remade at the inter 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 interstices. I can't say that word either.
Interspecies. Interstices. That's a hard word to say.
It's interstices.
Interstices. All right, thank you. A new word every day. What's it mean?
Like small, narrow spaces and gaps.
Ooh, thank you.
Weird. Of war. As the experiment of the archival interpretation, I brought Lankuman and his son Todd together to read, quote, First Letter to My Son, which Lankuman authored after he was shipped from Auburn to Greenhaven. Among the numerous accounts, the state violence and militant refusal that compromised prisoners call out freedom. Lankuman's entry stands out as the compendium's only love letter. While others mentioned love, they wrote about the truncated and incarcerated love, a love that was eclipsed by intense hatred of their keepers. By contrast, Lankuman leans into the love he felt towards his 40-year-old son, whom he had not yet met. And even now, as 4-year-old son, sorry, whom he have not yet met. And even now, as I suffer the loss of freedom, my heart sings with a secret knowledge that not now there is a part of me that does not suffer or feel the pain, and which is free and alive, and above all, young and growing. And 3 of us sat in the community room of Lankuman's Harlem apartment discussing this document, which Lankuman had not seen in 5 decades and which Todd could not remember ever hearing about. Though I initially interpreted First Letter to My Son as a fairly transparent expression of paternal longing and affection, after Todd asked his father to read the following passage a second time, a new meaning began to take shape. I know without being told that you and your stubbornness are many, and they are surely mine. That in our silence we see the countless thousands of things that is the world around you, and rather than speak or express your awareness of them in words, you feel them deep inside, and that you feel as like the notes of music, each different yet somehow related to each other, so that they seem to create a sound. But the sound they make is strange and different that the music that you hear in your mind. So they will say, "Oh, he is no silent, so quiet. Oh, he is so silent, so quiet." And they will not know that you see and hear and are aware, but do not understand how or why they make the strange sound they make. And later, when you are older and able to express yourself, you will try to tell them that they are making the wrong sound, that what they are making is not music. But they will tell you that you are stubborn and do not understand. This is what you will always have between you and the world, and you're hearing the sound of different drummers. In the profound moment of recognition, Todd turned to his father and said, "You wrote this in 71? when I was 4 years old and you knew exactly who I was? As Lokuman smiled and nodded knowingly, I too had a moment of recognition, realizing that this discourse on sound and silence, rhythm and language, expression and effect could also be read as a meditation on the Long Attica Revolt. Our collective reading of the letter unlocked hidden layers of meaning, invoking what anthropologists Sarah Imond and Shania Cordes called a poetics of living rebellion, a method that calls on us to think with fugitive acts of supremacy, settler colonial.
You skipped a line.
Oh yeah, okay. Fugitive acts of everyday people struggling to survive the shifting terrain of white supremacy, settler colonial, and capitalist power, and ecological devastation, while also tending to the forms of expansion, imagination, and rearticulation that inherently exists beyond this frame. This poetic of living rebellion mobilized its own rationality, a way of seeing, quote, a thousand of things that was the world, not through reason or logic, or by even by looking, a mode of apprehension that is structured through the episteme of racial colonial power. Rather, it acquires meaning through feelings and listening by engaging with sonic frequencies, pulsing cadences, and a quiet space in between. And as Lecuman explains, he could feel the world making the wrong sound. He sensed its disharmony and arrhythmia in his body and soul. Yet, no amount of rational communication could make the world hear what he heard. In her analysis of how Black life is made and remade under conditions of imposed non-being, Catherine McKittrick highlights the importance of sound, waveforms, the beats, rhythms, acoustics, notational modes, frequencies that undergird Black music, affirmed through cognitive schemas, modes of being human that refuse anti-Blackness, just as they restructure our existing systems of knowledge. For Lacuma and others, sound was an essential conduit of knowledge. Captives throughout the incarceral system had access to the radios and could sometimes absorb the sounds of Black music. The radio became a technology of revolutionary struggle through which listeners engaged in the process of reinventing themselves, developing sonic epistemologies, melodios, I can't say the damn word, that nourish resistance, contemplative practices, theatrical production, and Black radical imaginings. Before the takeover and the state of emergency, their secret meetings in the library and other furtive spaces involved discussions of revolutionary politics and culture, such as these domains became inseparable. An Attica brother told me that he authored a manual of incarceral guerrilla warfare while immersed in a spiritual jazz of Alison Coltrane. Yeah. After seizing Attica, the rebels announced to the world that, quote, what was happening here is but the sound before the fury of those who are oppressed. The Long Attica Revolt was a piercing sound, one that, as Fanon tells us, infused a new rhythm specific to a new generation of men, with a new language and a new humanity. First Letter to My Son is an ounce of love letter, is at once a love letter, a mention of black radical interpretations, and an index pointing to other source material. Lecumus affirms that the last line of the above stanza was a reference to William Melvin Kelly, 1962 novel, A Different Drummer, a citation that enriches the document's surplus of meaning. At their best, explains Joshua Myers, novels are much more than a literary phenomenon. They are like sounds of episteme, an alternative way of knowing. And Kelly's text, which articulate widely within New York prisons during this period. What articulated widely within New York prison during this period. The black population of the functional southern town embarked on the massive exodus after Tucker Caliban. The protagonist suddenly destroyed his crops, killing his livestock and setting his own house ablaze. Caliban is a descendant of the African, a mystical figure who generations earlier escaped from the slave of auction blocks and led a protracted campaign to liberate his people in the traditions of maroon resistance. The African was eventually hunted down and killed, but his sons survived, and for a century thereafter, the African's descendants labored as slaves, sharecroppers, and servants of the decadence of the slave catchers that killed them. Hold on a second, I'm gonna look ahead. Can someone please remember 87?
I'll remember 87, but while you're going ahead, it's and servants for the descendants of the slave catcher that killed him.
87. All right. Caliban incinerated his house, breaking the cycle of subservience. Soon after obtaining a stone that his ancestors had said to be praying over before he was killed. The recovered stone represents Caliban's reconnection to a deliberately suppressed tradition of black ancestral communion. I can't say it. Communion. And yet we never fully understand the inner thoughts and motivations that drove him and others to leave the town. This is because Kelly narrates the novels entirely through the eyes of a white townspeople who conspire to keep Caliban and others in their place, much like this chapter when A Different Drummer and, quote, First Letter to My Son are critiques of the Western epistemes incapacity to comprehend black rebellion. Jesus Christ. When liberal humanists' fixation with rights of incorporations into imperialist regimes are dislodged, a remarkable truth becomes evident. The Auburn rebels were never defeated. The incomprehensible violence of the state failed to divest them of their will to resist and become, across the protracted, multifaceted struggle. They saw themselves as prisoners only in the material sense. In their minds, they were already free. They aligned their actions with their beliefs and charted their own path on the cutting edge of incarceral wars. When we peel back the many layers of rage and suffering, the revenge fantasy, when we listen for the rhythms in the heartbeats of struggle and read the text of unwritten and unspoken demands, when we strive for intimacy with the inner logic of revolt, what we find is neither a desire of incorporation into their world nor dominance over it. Instead, we find an active desire for a new regime of human, a new world where it can thrive. It was not until June 9th, 1971, when the last of the Auburn rebels were transferred to Attica, that prison crats finally announced that Auburn had returned to normalcy. However, rebellion continued to seethe because beneath the surface, as with the solution of black rebellion on the streets and in the city jails, the administration merely displaced their insurgency to other prisons in Greenhaven, Lacuman, and others become involved in efforts to establish above ground political formations, including the labor union, and, as I show in chapter 5, an important inmate organization called the think tank. Several were shipped to Clinton, otherwise known as Clinton Concentration Camp, KKK, where, according to Ricardo de Leon of the Tombs Rebellion, they developed BPP, YLP, Weatherman cells, underground prison newspapers, and carried out persistent organizational and propaganda work. And of course, several were shipped to Attica. Oh my gosh. What's that word? Litigations forced prisoncrats to release Chomos and the original Auburn transferees into Attica's general populations. Veterans of the jail rebellion and those who had rebelled in large and small ways elsewhere welcomed them into a giant human circle staged in Attica's a yard. The circle represented an ongoing effort to organize a political Attica population to break down the internal divisions that kept them divided. An informer later told state investigators that he had witnessed numerous meetings and discussions in the yard between inmates who had been involved in the outbreak of the Tombs in Auburn. Among the topics of discussion, he continued where, quote, mistakes that were made in Tombs in Auburn with a view towards implementing new techniques when the disturbance occurred in Attica. Authorities would later cite documents such as this to try to prove that Attica was a pre-planned conspiracy, an assertion that sanitizes the repression that made a rebellion inevitable. Then, on August 12, 1974, California prisoncrat assassinated George Jackson.
August 21st, 1971.
Thank you. The chain of events had led to him being shot with a high-power rifle, is shrouded in mystery, and disinformation, painting him as bloodthirsty and demented. The official story is that after initiating a bloodbath that resulted in deaths of 3 guards and 2 captives, Jackson made a mad dash for the prison's outer walls, which he planned to demolish using a vial of liquid he thought was nitroglycerin, but which was actually diluted sulfuric acid. A lesser known container narrative is that Jackson sacrificed himself out of revolutionary love for those he cared about. According to people who survived the ordeal in San Quentin Ultra Punitive Adjustment Center, where the conflict took place, Jackson knew the guards were planning to snuff him out and fled the prison's interior to protect them from meeting the same fate. Through words and deeds, Jackson theorized, quote, a prison movement that was ultimately linked to global struggles against capital, white supremacy, and empire. His bold life and premature death had a profound influence on captives struggling in New York and beyond. The immediate response to Attica's population was to organize a memorable and remembrance of their fallen comrade. They organized a day-long silent fast and wore black armbands as a symbol of mourning. This had an effect. Note one of the organizers. We noted that if the people could come together for this, then they could come together for anything. Let us then finally turn our attention to the Attica Rebellion, a story that we only think we know, as should by now be clear. The events in Attica prisons were the result of a protracted accumulation of anti-incarceral struggle, The possibility perils the contradictions that were present in earlier moments of the revolts intensified in Attica. In in what follows a what's that word? A Derek.
Dudley, I hope you're here.
Nope, he's not there. I'm gonna have to look it up.
I go AFK. I'll be back.
It's decarcerate our understanding of what rebellion, revealing a black radical praxis of abolitionists in world making. And we'll stop there on chapter 3. Attica is revolutionary consciousness and abolitionist world making. So we're stopping on page 90. All right, it's open up for anybody. Anybody who wants to talk about it.
I really like how it mentioned that both the counter violence and the love were part of the politics of it.
Uh-huh.
Because violence, love, like as if they're total opposites. But if you're doing anything revolutionary, it's going to be based in not just like some hatred you have for your oppressor, but the love you have for your fellow person,
Yeah.
especially those who are oppressed.
Yeah. It's an act of liberation, and it's an act, and part of liberation is a healing mechanism in a sense, because as they said, they they brought on a new character based on the conditions and the objective reality that they lived through. It brought them to a newer development, a higher consciousness, right? Of knowing of what is going on. So yeah, part of that experience did bring people to a higher development of those things and understanding that, yes, as corny as it may sound, that revolution does have a sense of healing and love, because we have love for the marginalized people to seek the liberation process, to seek the revolutionary process and development, you know? Mm-hmm. With purpose, revolution with purpose, revolution with uh, a goal in mind to replace and rebuild something new that helps helps the masses to gain their liberation. Yeah,
Yeah, I should have used the word liberation because that's what I meant to say.
that's
Oops.
okay. That's okay. That's okay. Does anybody else have anything else to say before we close it out?
I thoroughly enjoyed the last section. I was very touched by the first letter to his son, and uh, it was really deep.
Yeah, even his son transformed too by reading that letter and realizing, like, later on, like, that goes to tell you that when you read something, right, that later on in life, as you develop and you go back to that reading, I noticed this, and I know I'm doing
Mhm.
this with like communist theory books. When I go back and revisit something, because of my development, my experiences, I realize things I miss, and it adds to my knowledge and my consciousness to affect the world. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that was pretty cool. It's pretty cool. And I like how they used the humanism, and they used how, like, it's a different type of species, because it's true. It's like a reborn, it's a rebirth in a sense, you know, of a conscious level to engage consciously in the material world. All right. Does
Yeah,
anybody else have any? Yeah, sorry.
because we can't be liberated until we realize ourselves fully.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, then. Does anybody else have anything else before I close it down? All right. Well, I wish you all a good evening. I don't know if Chicken Strips and Two Spirit are going live. No idea. So we'll see. But anyways, I'll talk to you all
Much
later. Have a
love.
good one.
Take care.